Let's go. Starting. All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. Baruch Hashem, a lot to do today, and Baruch Hashem, a lot to do today in general, not just the Daf, just a lot to do and accomplish today. We begin by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul. Get to them in just a moment. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Shani and Avram Kelman, for dedicating all the Shir Midrashos this month in honor of Bichil's engagement to Alana Falik and in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kelman and Alexander and Frederica David. To thank Barak, Maya, Sandy Hoffman, Dora Limas, and Avi Melamed for dedicating all the Shir Midrashos this month in memory of Reuven Ben Emmanuel. To thank Ayala and Sarah Steinberg for dedicating the Shurim this month in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Shulamis Bas Susha. To thank our Daf Yomi Shir for dedicating the Shurim this month in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Yehuda Ben Michal. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Hillary Jacobson Kent and Akiva Kent in memory of Mordechai Menashe Ben Shmaryahu, Milton Jacobson, Zichron Livracha. To thank Nathan and Beth Adler for dedicating the Week of Learning in memory of Ben Adler, Achavar Baruch Mordechai, Ben Moreno Rab Nassan, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We thank our additional sponsors today, our Daf Yomi sponsors, Baruch Fischel and Sonia Kozlovsky, for dedicating the shir today in honor of the birth of a son to their daughter, Penina Rivka Shacht, son-in-law Yosef Shacht, Mazel Tov, to the Kozlovsky, to the Shacht Mishpacha. What a beautiful, beautiful way to close out 1 year, and the Mirza Hashem paved the way for the other. Mazel Tov Baruch B'Zocha, Lachnisa B'Risa Shanu Avinu Bizmano. And we thank our shir sponsor today, Said and Semahakin, for dedicating the shir in the schus of a refuah shalema for Tova, Talia Miriam Bas Orli Yehudit. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, she will have a complete refuah together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Rebbe, with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Pei Aleph, 81. And we are picking up Emir Hashem on the bottom of Pei Amud Beis at the Gemara. Thank you to Rabbi Richter for giving such a wonderful shir yesterday. And Rebbe say, let's go. Ibai Lahu. Here we go. A lot to do. Ibai Lahu. Shomeres Yavam Shemesa. So here's the interesting case. Let's say you have a Shomeres Yavam who dies. Remember again, we know our case of Shomeres Yavam. We're experts in Yibum already after we spent, how long was it Yavamas? 5.5 years, I think it was, right, that we were in Yavamas. So remember again, Reuven's married to Rachel. Reuven dies without children. Reuven has a brother who survives from Shimon. Shimon now has an obligation to do Yibum with Rachel. So before Yibum occurs, so Rachel is called a Shomeres Yavam, a woman who is essentially waiting for Yibum. So what's that? So let's say again, Rachel passes away. So what is the halacha? Shomeres Yavam Shemesa Mikovra. Who has the obligation to bury her? An interesting shaila. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this. Yershi habal kavrila, the karyasi Suva. Do we say the inheritors of the husband? I both say, who are the inheritors of the husband? So remember again, do we say that now remember, the inheritors of the husband is Shimon, right? Shimon is the brother, because remember again, when Reuven passes away, so Reuven's family inherits him. So do we say that essentially again, it's the husband's family who has the obligation to go ahead and bury her? O Dilma Yershia Av Kavrila. Or maybe it's the inheritors of the father. And I will say the inheritors of the father in this context means who? Her inheritors. Because remember again, halacha l'maisa, again, if she also has inheritors from her family. So essentially we're asking, who has the obligation to bury her? Is it her husband's family? In other words, we frame that as those who inherit the husband, or is it her family? We term that as the inheritors of the father. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this. Amrav Amram, Tashma, Desanyo, Shomeres Yavam Shemesa. If a Shomeres Yavam dies, top of Pei Aleph, Yersheha, Yershei Kesuvasa, Chayavim Bikvurasa. Her inheritors, interesting, her inheritors, Yershei Kesuvasa. Those who inherit her Kesuva are obligated to go ahead and bury her. And I both say, who inherits her Kesuva? Remember again, it's not her family. Ultimately, again, Yershei Kesuvasa will be her husband's family. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Osan Yarshim Yarshin Kesuvasa Chayav Mikvurasa. Now remember again, this is a different kind of case. Because remember, this is a Shomeres Yavam. So that means, again, remember, when Rachel dies, when Reuven dies, now Rachel falls to Yibum to Shimon. Now remember again, who inherits the estate of Reuven? Who inherits that estate? Essentially, it's Shimon. So now the Kesuva, remember again, is levied against the estate as well. Remember, that's why we know Shimon the Yavam doesn't write a new Kesuva, right? Whose Kesuva does he use? He uses the old Kesuva. So halacha l'maisa, again, when we say Yarshei Kesuvasa is essentially the husband's family. Since they inherit the Kesuva, they also have the obligation to bury her. Amar Abaye says, Afanan Tanina, we also learn this. The Gemara says, Afanan Nami Tanina, Amana Nizonis Menichse Yisomim, and Amana is sustained from the estate of the Yisomim, Umay Seyada Shalahan, and any earnings she has belong to them as well. The Ein Chayavin Bikvurasa, but they are not obligated in her kvura. They don't have obligated in her kvura. Yarsheha, Yarshei Kesuvasa, Chayavin Bikvurasa. But her inheritors, those who inherit her ksuva, they are chayiv to go ahead and bury her. The Gemara says, but one second. Ve'ezo hi amana sheyeshna shnei yarshin. Who is the amana who has two sets of inheritors? Who is that? Havi Omer, Zu Shomeres Yavam. Ultimately, going to both say this is the case of a Shomeres Yavam. So both say it's very interesting. The Shomeres Yavam herself has two different sets of inheritors. On one hand, again, she has the inheritors of her deceased husband's estate, which is now the Yavam, right, Shimon and the family, and her father's family, who are the inheritors, ultimately, again, of any of her properties. Therefore, Abosai, the Gemara wants to suggest over here that those who inherit the Ksuva, ultimately, again, are the ones who would be chayiv for her kvura. Who inherits her ksuva? Now, Abosai, I want to be clear. When we're speaking about her ksuva, what are we talking about? We're talking about the 100 or the 200 zuz. What are we not talking about? Nichse melog, nichse tzon barzel. That's not when we say Yarshei Kesuvos. So we're talking about who is it that stands to quote unquote inherit the Iker Kesuva. Who inherits the Iker Kesuva over here? It's the husband's family. So because the husband's family inherits the Iker Kesuva, therefore halacha l'maisa, they also have the obligation to bury her. And I will say that is indeed how the Rambam Paskins in Hilchos Ishus, Parachav Beis Halacha Yud, V'Yarshei Habal Chayavin Bikvurasa. Those who inherit the husband are the ones who are obligated to go ahead and bury her as well. So therefore, just to reframe, I'm giving you the halacha a little bit early, but just because I want to make it clear. So remember again, Rachel's married to Reuven. Reuven dies without children. Rachel now falls to Yibum to Shimon, Reuven's surviving brother. So now what's the halacha? Now Rachel dies. When does Rachel die? Before Yibum has been performed. Shabbos say, what's the shaila? Very simple shaila. What's the shaila? Who pays for the levaya? That's it. Who pays for the levaya? So Shabbos says, so again, the Gemara essentially comes to the conclusion, obligation of burial is tethered to ksuva. So whoever inherits ksuva ultimately, again, assumes obligation of burial. In this case, the ksuva, remember again, is always against the estate of Reuven, the deceased husband. Who inherits the estate of Reuven? His surviving brother and family members. Just as they inherit the ksuva, so too they inherit the obligation to go ahead and bury Rachel. Good. So I'm Rava, sorry. So again, I gave you the conclusion before the sugyas worked through, but again, we'll go through it now. So Rava says, why can't the surviving brother Shimon, why can't Shimon say, listen, I'm just inheriting my brother, right? That's all I am. Why should I assume any level of obligation for the burial of Rachel? Because essentially we come upon him from two different directions. If you truly inherit your brother, that means you also inherit what? The ksuva obligation. If you inherit the ksuva obligation, then halacha l'maisa, you have an obligation to bury his widow, to bury your yavama. And by the way, if you're not going to bury the wife, no problem, yitin ksuvasa. Then what should you do? Pay out the ksuva. Pay out the ksuva, and then the burial expenses will be paid ultimately again from the ksuva itself. Amarle, hachi ka'amina. This is what we mean to say. Amarle, hachi ka'amina. Ach ani yoresh es ishto einani kover. So again, why can't the surviving brother say, listen, I'm just inheriting my brother. Had there been yibum, I'm willing to do yibum. But why should I assume the obligation to bury her? V'imishum ksuva. Now both say, now you're going to tell me. So now you're going to tell me like this. So Shimon will say, see, remember, Rachel died while she's waiting for Yibum. Shimon says, I'm so sorry about the loss, but not so sorry that what? Not so sorry that I'm paying for the levaya, right? Again, emotions only run so high, right? So again, I'm not paying for the levaya, and again, at the end of the day, why should I? Why should I? Again, if we would have done yibum, of course, she would have been my wife. I would have taken care of her levaya. We didn't do yibum. I inherited my brother. Why do I inherit the obligation to go ahead and pay for a burial? So you're going to tell me, fine, don't pay for the burial, but pay her ksuva? Why should I have to pay out her ksuva? After all, the Gemara says, ksuva. Lo nitna ksuva ligbos mechayim. This is actually is a fascinating statement. A ksuva is only meant to be paid when the husband is alive. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Ligbos mechayim. Kolzman shabal chay. Right? A ksuva lo nitna ksuva ligbos mechayim. A ksuva is not payable while the husband is still alive. Kolzman shabal chay. Va'ani bimkom bal omed sheisi mitzap lekonsa. So we'll say essentially what we're going to say. This phrase essentially means is. Ksuva is not, literally translated, ksuva is not payable while the husband is alive, which is another way of saying like this. A ksuva is only payable when a woman is able to marry someone else. In this context, was Rachel able to marry someone else? No. Why? She was subject to Yibum. So Shimon could claim, why should I have to pay a ksuva? A ksuva is payable when a woman is free to marry someone other than her husband. In this context, ultimately, Shimon says, I'm an extension of Ruvain. I'm an extension of Ruvain, the deceased husband. So halacha l'maisa, again, she was not free to marry anyone else. If that's the case, the ksuva is not payable at all. So so in other words, halacha l'maisa, I shouldn't have to pay for a burial, and I shouldn't have to pay for the ksuva. So we'll say, Soman Shamislei the Isle Medrash Ksuba. Now we'll say, this concept, now this is very interesting, because what Shimon in this case is advancing is this idea that a ksuva is only payable, the way he phrases it is, a ksuva is not payable when the husband is alive. Now we'll say, that statement is not totally true, right? Sometimes a ksuva is payable when a husband is alive. Like when? Like divorce. What it means is, the ksuva is only payable when the wife has a right to marry someone else. In this case, Shimon says, she didn't have a right to marry someone else. She's tethered to me. So now she died. I'm sorry. But why should I have an obligation to pay out the ksuva? To which the Gemara says, Man shamislei de islay medrash ksuva. We'll say, who is the opinion who says that we darshan the words of a ksuva? So in other words, we'll say, this concept must be rooted in the text of the ksuva itself. So who is the one who tells us that we're medayek in the wording of the ksuva? Look at Rashi just a moment. Man shamislei de islay medrash ksuva. Rashi says, Shedorish lashon ksuva, shekasav bo lichishetinasi la'acher titli ma shekasav lechi. Because we'll see in the Ksuva it says, when you marry someone else, you are hereby entitled to whatever your entitlement is, 100 zuz, 200 zuz, whatever else it might be. But I will say, but the lashon is when you marry someone else, which tells us that Ksuva is only payable when a wife is entitled to marry someone else. So who darshans the Ksuva? Beishamai. Beishamai de Amri, but 1 second. Beishamai also holds that what? Shtar ha'omid ligvos kegabui dami. We'll say, but Beishamai also holds that a document that is roi, that is fit to be collected, is as if what? It's already been collected. Look at Rashi. Beishamai, shemishi yesh lo shtar chov al chavero, hu muchzak b'nichse halo ve'yoser mimenu. So we'll say, we also know the Quran. So Beishamai is one who makes this deal, right? That halacha l'maisa, a ksuva is only payable when a woman is able to remarry. In this context, she's not able to remarry because she's tethered to the yavam. But it's the same Beishamai also said that a document that is ready to be collected, or I should say a chov, a loan, or an obligation that is ready to be collected, is as if it has already been collected. If that's the case, then the truth is the woman herself should be muchsak in the ksuva. After all, the Gemara says, Disnan, mesu ba'alein achlo shasu. About an interesting case. Transition in just a moment. Sota. Who's Sota? Sota is a woman who is suspected of committing adultery. Now remember again, we go through a whole process. She's warned in front of 2 witnesses, violates the warning. So now halacha l'maisa, her husband brings her to drink the meisota in the Beis Hamikdash. What happens if halacha l'maisa, the husband dies before the bitter waters are administered to her? What happens in that context? Meisu ba'alein at shelo shasu. What happens if the husband dies before the wife gets to drink? So Beishamai omim not los ksuva savelo shosos. Beishamai says she gets her ksuva and she does not have to drink. Ubeisila omrim o shosos o notlos o lo notlos ksubasa. Beisila says, no. Either you drink or you get your, right? I'm sorry, o shosos, either you drink and get your ksuva, or you don't drink and don't get your ksuva. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. Beisila o shosos o lo notlos ksubasa. So the Gemara says, o shosos, how could the wife drink once her husband is dead? After all, the Torah says that in order for the wife to drink, what has to happen? Her husband has to bring her to the Kohen. And in this context, the husband can't bring her. Why? Why? He's dead. To which the Gemara says, Ella, rather what Beis Hillel means to say is like this. Mitoch shalosh shosos lo notlos ksuva. Rather what it means to say is like this. Since the wife cannot drink because her husband is dead, therefore what? She does not get her ksuva. So let's go back. Beis Shammai says, not los ksuva savalo shosos. So Beis Shammai says she takes her ksuva, she gets her ksuva, and she does not drink. So Rabbi says it's a fascinating halacha. See, here you have this woman suspected of adultery. The process could not continue because the husband died. So therefore, halacha lamaisa, what do we say? She gets her ksuva. She can't drink, but she gets her ksuva. So the Gemara says, Va'amai. But why should she get to drink her ksuva? Why should she get to take her ksuva? Va'amai. Sveikahu, safek zanoi, safek lo zanoi. Now we'll say, remember again, what's the safek? Maybe she committed adultery, maybe she didn't commit adultery. V'ka'asi safek umotzi midei vadai. And I will say, so tell me. So I will say, so why should a safek, right? The safek motzi midei vadai. So I will say, so interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa. So there's a safek that she committed adultery. Now, what's the halacha? If a woman committed adultery, she loses her ksuva. So the safek come and go ahead and obliterate the vadai, which is that at one point in time she had a ksuva. Kasavri Beis Shammai shtar ha'omed legabos kegaboy dami. So we'll say this is incredible. Beis Shammai holds that halacha l'maisa, any document that is fit to be collected is as if it's already been collected. Beis Shammai views that a woman is in possession of her ksuva. That's how he views it. Since there's an entitlement that's there, therefore Beis Shammai views it as if she is in possession of it. So interestingly enough, Beis Shammai will therefore hold that halacha l'maisa, in this case, where there's a safek, did she commit adultery? Did she not commit adultery? And right, if she committed adultery, she loses her ksuva. If she didn't commit adultery, ultimately she doesn't lose her ksuva. So halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says like this: the safek that maybe she committed adultery will not remove the vadai. What's the vadai? The vadai is that she is in possession, so to speak, of the ksuva. That's what Beis Shammai says in a case where the husband died and couldn't administer the bitter waters to her, she'll collect her ksuva. So we'll say, so therefore again, so remember again, what's our case that we're going back to? What's our case? We're going back for just a moment and trying to figure out, Rachel died while waiting for Yibum, right? Rachel was married to Ruvain. Ruvain died without children. Rachel is a shomeres yavam to Ruvain's brother Shimon. Now, while waiting for Yibum, what happens? Rachel dies. So what's the shayla? Who buries her? So the Gemara wanted to suggest that halacha l'maisa, we should say to Shimon, listen, either bury her or pay her ksuva. Ultimately, again, but now the Gemara is saying, so why would you have to pay her ksuva? It must reflect the view of Beis Shammai, because Beis Shammai says something that you're entitled to is as if it's already been collected, in which case perhaps she really had the ksuva already. But here's the problem. What about the phrase, what about the fact about say that the ksuva itself says that the ksuva is only payable when ultimately, again, she is able to marry someone else. And here she is not able to marry someone else because she is tethered to the yavam. What about that piece? Ravashi says, yavam nami ka'acher dami. That's easy. Ravashi says, no problem. The yavam isn't acher. Right? The yavam, in other words, like, in other words, when she married Ruvain, and in the ksuva it's written, when you are able to marry someone else, ultimately you could collect your ksuva, falling to yibum, being subject to Yibum, and now being ready to marry Shimon, that's also Acher. That satisfies that clause ultimately, again, of when you're able to marry someone else. So I will say, again, I showed you the Rambam a little bit early in the Sugya. So the way we pass in halacha, I will say is, and I just want to point out just the logic. Remember, the obligation for a husband to bury his wife is T'na'i Ksuva. That's one of the obligations in the Ksuva. So essentially what we're going to say is like this. Halacha l'maisa, whoever pretty much owns the ksuva is going to have the obligation of burial. That's really what it comes down to. So in this case, when Rachel dies, waiting for Yibum with Shimon, who inherits the ksuva? Who inherits the ksuva? It's Ruvain's family, Shimon and the remaining brothers. They inherit the ksuva. Again, when we're speaking about ksuva, what are we talking about? 100 or 200 zuz. Property she brought into the marriage, nichse melug, nichse tzon barzel, that reverts back to her family. But who inherits the ksuva? It is Ruvain's family, the deceased husband's family. So Shimon, the other brothers, they inherit the ksuva. Once they inherit the ksuva, they also assume the obligation to pay for Rachel's burial. That's how he paskin. Beautiful. Shalach le Rav Abaye bi'ad Rav Shmaya bar Zera umi nitna ksuva ligbos mechayim. But one second, I will say, let's analyze this. So is the ksuva really collectible while the husband is still alive? Which is again another way of saying a ksuva is only collectible when a woman is able to marry someone else. So if the husband, so to speak, is alive, and we're including in the husband in that yavam as well, is the ksuva really collectible? To which the Gemara says, Vatanya, Rabbi Abba Omer Sha'alti es sumchus. I once asked sumchus. We'll say, fascinating case. Harotze sheyimkar b'nichse achiv keitzodu oseh. Rabbi say, listen to this fascinating case. So we'll say, so now remember, what we're asking now here is a very simple question. We're asking here is halacha l'maisa. How do we view the ksuva? While Rachel is waiting for Yibum with Shimon? How do we view that? Do we view that ultimately, again, like we just said before, that Shimon the Yavam is an acher, is another person, and therefore essentially the ksuva is collectible by Rachel? She's not going to get paid out, but it's technically collectible. Or do we say no? The Yavam stands in place of who? Of the husband, of the deceased brother, and therefore again, she's not permitted to any other man. If she's not permitted to any other man, then halacha l'maisa, the ksuva is not collectible at all. Now, I will say, the reason why this question is very important is as follows. Let's say again, Reuven dies, Rachel falls to Yibum before Shimon. And now what happens? Shimon wants to sell property. Right? He wants to sell property that belonged to Reuven, right? Because now he effectively inherits the estate. He wants to sell property. Can he sell property from the estate? Can he sell it? Technically he can, but here's the problem. What's the problem? All property of Reuven's estate is what? Is encumbered to Rachel's ksuva. So here's what I will say. Often people don't, it's even today, right? What do you do? What do you do when you go ahead and you want to buy property today? The first thing you do, a title search, right? You want to make sure there's no liens against the property. So interestingly enough, any time that a married man sold property, I will say, there always is an encumbrance. To be clear, right? Anything, this is a good thing to know in life, anything and everything you own, right, and will ever own is encumbered to your wife. I don't mean that like in a metaphorical sense, right? I mean it like in a literal legal sense. This is what you write in the Ksuva. Afilu min galima dal kaspoy. Even the shirt on my back is encumbered to the Ksuva. So I'm about to say, so watch this. In this case, Shimon the Yavam wants to be able to sell off property of his brother's estate. So how does he do it? But he wants to sell it unencumbered. Watch this, this is incredible. So what should he do? If he's a Kohen, he should make her a nice su'uda, a nice su'uda, and ultimately, again, appease her. I was going to say, what does he need her to do? He needs her to release claim on properties. Now, not all properties, because remember, let's say her ksuva is 200 zuz. So we'll say, so here's the issue, interesting with ksuva. Even when the ksuva is 200 zuz, and let's say Reuven has 10,000 zuz worth of property. So even though there's only an encumbrance of 200 zuz, that 200 zuz encumbrance devolves upon everything. So if he's a Kohen, appease her. He says, make her a su'uda. I don't think su'udas work contemporarily, right? It'll probably be something in the jewelry realm that work a little bit better. The point is, make her happy, get her something nice, do something beautiful for her, and essentially get her to actively release her encumbrance upon the property. In other words, upon the property in excess of the value of her ksuva. All right. So you have to do im Yisraelu. If he's Yisrael, then what can you do? Megaresh beget v'yachzir. Divorce her. And I both say, now again, I want to plan. This is a planned divorce. In other words, that this is a divorce with again a remarriage. That's the goal over here. Divorce her ultimately, and then remarry her. Rashi says over here, Megarsha beget Umagbes ksuvasa, umocher mashiyirtze, umachzira amnas ksuvasa rishona. Shabbos says, so what you could do is you could divorce her, go ahead and with the plan, we're going to divorce, right? You get your ksuva, so to speak. Now the property is unencumbered. Sell off whatever you want to sell off and remarry her. And by the way, we're going to talk about this halacha. When a man divorces and then remarries his wife, let's say he did not yet pay out the ksuva. If you divorce and then remarry, the original ksuva could still remain in effect. It's an interesting halacha. So divorce. So I was going to say again, the strategy doesn't work by a Kohen. Why doesn't it work by a Kohen? Because a Kohen can't remarry his divorcee. So I'll say I'm a base. And if you would think that nitna ksuva ligbos mechayim, Shabbos says, I don't understand. If ksuva is collectible during the lifetime of the husband, which Shabbos means if ksuva, like Beis Shammai said, that a ksuva, since it's owed to her, it's as if it's already collected by her. So if we want to say that maybe there's a model in which ksuva is collectible even before she has the right to marry someone else, I have a much simpler eitzah. What's a simpler eitzah? So niyachid lo shir ksuva v'ashar Lisbon. Go ahead about saying what? Dedicate, right? Or not dedicate, designate, thank you. Designate specific properties for the payment of the the ksuva, and that lifts the lien from everything else. In other words, I don't understand what's the big deal here. Why do you have to start with making a suuda, divorcing her, remarrying her? It's very simple. Her ksuva is worth 200 zuz. Just go ahead and say, hey, Rachel, properties A and B combined, they're worth 500 zuz, more than enough to satisfy your ksuva. We'll take into account depreciation. Also, let those fields be your ksuva. Lift the lien from the rest of the properties and let the husband or the yavam go ahead and sell off whatever he wants. To which the Gemara says, "Velosa masnisin." But 1 second, if that was true, I can answer. We'll say, pay Aleph and base 81b, 3 lines down from the top. According to that reasoning, Velosa masnisin, ask from the Mishnah, Lo yomer lo harek ksuva seich munechas leich ala shulchan. We'll say in general from our Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? A man cannot say to his wife, your ksuva is sitting on the table. We'll say, now what does it mean your ksuva is sitting on the table? What the Mishnah is saying is a man cannot go ahead and in the ksuva identify a specific source of payment. In other words, let's say a man says like this, Rachel, your ksuva is 200 zuz. Your ksuva is going to be paid from the 3 bars of gold that I have in the safe. Right? Mishnah says you can't do that. Ella, kol mechasav achrayin l'ksuva. So rather, we'll say, what do we say? All of his property ultimately, again, is pledged to the ksuva. So we'll say, so again, what do you see from there? You see from there that ksuva is not collectible during the lifetime of the husband. Because the truth is, and we say during the lifetime, while the wife can't marry anyone else. Because if ksuva was really collectible during the lifetime of the husband, then what? We'll say, then what? Then a husband / a yavam should be able to identify certain specific properties that'll be the source of payment for the ksuva. And the beauty of that is, what does that do? It lifts the encumbrance from everything else and allows the husband, the yavam, the estate to do business with the other properties. To which the Gemara says, no. In the Mishnah, Hassam Eitza Tova Kamashmalan. Rabbi say when the Mishnah says that a husband should not identify certain items for the payment of the ksuva, that's an Eitza Tova. That's good advice. What's the good advice? So we'll say, now by the way, what's the Eitza Tova? Think about this for just a moment. Imagine for a moment, Reuven marries Rachel, he writes up a ksuva. And in the ksuva he writes, Rachel, your ksuva 200 zuz is payable from 3 bars of gold in the safe. What's the problem with that? What's the problem? If something happens to the gold, right? Let's say the gold is stolen. What does Reuven now have to do? He has to write a brand new ksuva. Now both say, so again, writing a brand new ksuva is to do. So Chazal said, don't do that. Instead, just write a general ksuva, where although it is a more expansive lien, you don't have to worry about if something happens to designated properties. To which the Gemara says, Dilo Teimahachi, Seifa, Diktani, look at the Seifa that said, V'chein lo yomar adam leishto, hare ksuva seich munachas leich ala shulchan, ela kol nechasav achrayim l'ksuvas ishto. I baile lezeb, the Gemara says. So therefore, interestingly enough, the Gemara is suggesting over here, is it possible to create a model where certain properties are designated for the ksuva? Is that possible? It is, but you need the consent of the woman. But the Chazal are telling us it's not a good idea. And the reason it's not a good idea is because once you get into that level of specificity, if something happens to the specific property, you run the risk then of what? Having to go ahead and redraft the Ksuva. Elakol nechasav achrayim l'ksuvas ishto. I boile lezabune. Hachanami de la matzi mizbin. Ela eitza tova kamash malan. Hachanami eitza tova kamash malan. So Rabbi says, interestingly enough, when the Mishnah says before that halacha lamaisa, the ksuva lien devolves upon all property, and the Mishnah explicitly advises against going ahead and identifying a specific property or properties as source for payment of the ksuva, that's an eitzah tova. That's an eitzah tova. I will say, by the way, how beautiful is it? Say, how beautiful is it? I will say, this is what it means to be a Jew. Sounds of Gemara, the sounds of Yud Gimel Midos. You see, you can look at it two ways. You could look at it as an interruption, or you could say, beautiful. Beautiful to be bombarded by Kiddusha on every single. I will say, it gives you a little bit of a glimpse how the Ribono Shel Olam feels as well. Right? Think about in Shamayim, there's like a cacophony of spiritual sounds. This one's learning Gemara. This one's writing a prosbol. This one's doing Ataras Nedarim. They're up to Slichas. This one's saying Kaddish. This one's doing this. And how much the Ribono Shel Olam must love it. It's almost like, like when your kids run over to you and they're all talking at the same time, right? So your first reaction is, stop it, right? That's your first, stop it. And then you take a step back and you say, oh my gosh, what a schus it is to be bombarded by little voices, right? What a privilege it is to be in a home where there is this cacophony of this one wants this and this, and they're all coming to me and they all love me. And I don't know if they all love me, but at least they all want something from me. Right? So again, and you realize like it's so beautiful. This is beautiful. Like this is what it means to be a yid. Constant activity, constant cacophony. It's beautiful. Okay, the Gemara says, Ella, Rabbi Abba Kasha. Ella, Rabbi Abba Kasha. So I will say again, but what do we do with the same with Rabbi Abba? To which the Gemara, look here, Rashi for just a moment. Ella, Rabbi Abba Kasha. Rashi says right across in Rashi. Adenegarish la niache la shari girishin ginayhem l'shtein ella vaday taima. So I don't understand. Rabbi Abba says, if you want to free up property in the Ibom case, what should you do? Divorce her, and go ahead and then remarry her. So Gemara says, I don't understand, but if that's the case, that in reality, you could just designate property for the ksuva, and if she's willing, she can lift her lien against everything else, then why do you have to start with Gedershin? Why employ a mechanism of divorce that seems so much more embarrassing and so much more difficult? Just agree on certain designated properties and lift the lien from everything else. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Abba nami lo kasha mishum eva. Rabbi said, this is absolutely fascinating. Rabbi Abba says, no, it's better to go ahead and do the divorce mechanism than do the designation mechanism. Why? Because with designation, we're concerned about animosity. Rabbi say, this is wild. Listen to this. Rabbi say, this is an incredible Gemara. See, here's what's happening over here, right? Let's go back for just a moment, right? Shimon is ready to do Yibam with Rachel, but remember again, he wants to sell off property now. Could he sell off property? No, why not? Everything is encumbered per the Ksuva. See, he needs a mechanism to lift the encumbrance. But yet he wants to do Yibum. So we'll say, so what does he do? So Rabbi Abba says, divorce Rachel. Go ahead and then, so to speak, the Ksuva is payable. Sell off whatever you want to sell off, and then go ahead and remarry her. You can remarry with the first Ksuva. Says the Gemara Ribono Shel Olam, why do you have to do that? Why not just say Rachel? Do you agree to designate certain properties for your ksuva? Designate those properties, lifts the lien against everything else, and then do. To which the Gemara will say something absolutely amazing. Designation of properties, the Gemara says, we're concerned about animosity. What's the concern about animosity? What's the concern? Because if a woman knows that her husband had designated properties for a ksuva, what does that look like? It looks like he's preparing for a divorce. See, if he divorces her and remarries her, and they both know that essentially they're just creating a legal reality, right? To go ahead and free up properties, they're both on the same page, great, she's happy to do it. But to create a model where, again, there are properties designated for her ksuva, and that's where she lives with that reality, that creates animosity within a marriage. See, Rabbi say, it's such an incredible yesod. You see, in the case of where, yesod in marriage, in the case where the property is designated, that's not a normal situation. So because it's not a normal situation, she's always left wondering, what is the status of her marriage? In the case where they divorce and then get remarried, The status of the marriage is clear. We just had to do this in order to free up a lien, but Lamaisa, I love you, I'm in it. See what I say? What's the yesod? What's the yesod? The worst thing in marriage is when parties to the relationship are not clear about the intentions of the other. Right? When you live with the specter of ambiguity in a marriage, that undermines fundamental shalom bayis. If I don't really know what you're thinking, and I don't really know where you're holding, it's almost impossible to build a marriage. If I know where you're holding, I know exactly, okay? And even though I know where you're holding, and by the way, there's going to be some difficult times. We're going to get divorced. We're going to get remarried. There's going to be ups and downs. But through the ups and downs, I know where you're holding. Then at the end of the day, we can build marriage. And I both say the same thing that's true with marriage is also true in our relationship with Hashem. See, I both say the worst thing in our relationship with Hashem is ambiguity. Are you in or aren't you in? See, and the emotion wonders that sometimes. Are you in or you're not in? See, if I'm in, even when I make mistakes, even when I mess up, and even there are days when I check out. But Kadosh Baruch Hu knows, even when I check out, I'm really in. I'm committed. I'm just struggling right now. As long as Kadosh Baruch Hu knows that I'm in, as long as there's no ambiguity, a relationship can handle ups and downs. Where there's ambiguity, that erodes at the very fundamental fabric of a relationship. It's true in marriage, it's true in emotion. What the emotion wants from us more than anything is like this. I will say this is apropos for Rosh Hashanah. Again, amazing timing in this Gemara. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu want from me, from my relationship? Two simple words. I'm in. Those are the words you have to say. I'm in. I'm in doesn't mean I'm always going to be perfect. I'm in doesn't mean I'm always firing on all cylinders. I'm in doesn't mean that I always what I'm supposed to do. What it means is even when I mess up, I'm still in. Incredible. Let's go back there. So the Gemara says, "Hu gavra denafle le'ivam pumadisa." I'll say just a few more lines. Then we'll stop for today. Hu gavra denafle le'ivam pumadisa. There was a guy whose brother died, and now his sister-in-law falls to Yibum Tim Pumpadisa. Get ready for this. Boy achula mifsa le begita minei. Shabbos says, just imagine the scene. Reuven's married to Rachel, right? Reuven dies. So now Rachel falls to Shimon. And let's assume Shimon's the oldest brother, right? So he falls to Shimon and Yibum. What happens? They have another younger brother, Levi. Levi wants to give a get to Rachel. Now, why does Levi want to give a get to Rachel? Because Levi wants to share in the inheritance of Reuven's estate equally with his brothers. Shabbos say, watch, play this out. If Shimon does Yibum, who inherits Reuven's estate? Who inherits it? Shimon. Totally. If Shimon does not do Yibum, but he does Chalitza, so who inherits the estate? All of the brothers equally. So Levi, it's always the little brother, right? So Levi says, I don't want you to do Yibum, because if you do Yibum, you get all of Reuven's estate. So I want you to do Chalitza. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give Rachel a get. Because remember also we learned in Yavamis, a get precludes Chalitza, precludes Yibum. I'm going to give Rachel a get. That way you can't do Yibum, and all of us will share on the property equally. So I will say, so Levi didn't give the get yet. He didn't do it yet, but he's getting ready to do it. So we'll say, so watch this. Amarle, my daitech. So Shimon says, 1 second, hold up. What's your problem? Mishum nechasi, because you want to inherit Reuven's property along with me, no problem. I'll share the property with you. It's okay. I want to do Yibum with Rachel. I want to do the mitzvah, and it's fine. I'm happy to share. In other words, I will inherit it, but after I inherit it, I'm happy to gift you a portion in the estate. No need to start making gittin. Rav Yosef said, Kevan de Amar Rabbanan lo Lisbin avagav de Zaman lo Havin Zvine Zvine. So listen to this. So Rav Yosef says that's a very nice thought, but at the end of the day, it actually doesn't work. In the same way that a Yavam can't go ahead and sell off property while he's waiting to do Yibum, he also what? He can't gift it away. And any promises that he makes with the property before Yibum has occurred, ultimately are what? Are null and void. Look at Rashi, almost right across. Rashi says, Kevan dam Rabbanan, Shomeras Yavam, Ein HaYavam Rashai Limkar, Kidarmina Lakaman B'Shmaitin. Mishneh Torah says, same way that we've seen up until now, that the Yavam, while he's waiting to do Yibum, can't really negotiate anything with the estate of the deceased. So even Shimon's promise to give Levi a portion in the estate, it's very nice, but it's halachically meaningless. This Sanya we learned, if someone died If someone died and he left behind the Shomeres Yavam, v'eniach nichasim me'amoneh, and he left property of 100 moneh, af al pi sheksubasa eina ela moneh lo yimkar, shekol nichasav achrayin l'ksubasa. So both say this is the case we've been dealing with, which is what? Reuven's married to Rachel, Reuven dies, and Reuven leaves behind an estate of 100 moneh. Rachel has a ksuva of 1 moneh. Nevertheless, the Yavam is not, before Yibum, the Yavam is not permitted to go ahead and do anything with the estate. Why? Because the entire estate is encumbered to the Ksuva. So if Rabbi said the same way that the Yavam can't sell the estate, Shimon also can't what? He can't promise a portion of the estate to his younger brother Levi. Amar li Abaye, v'chol heicha dam Rabbanan lo Lizbin, af agav de Zabin lo haviz vinezvines. So Rabbi say, is that to say that anytime that Chazal said, you can't sell something, if you sold it, the sale is not valid? Is that true? V'hatanan we learned. So we'll say, so remember again, this is the case in the previous Mishnah where we learned that halacha l'maisa, a woman who inherited property after Erison. Remember this case 2 Mishnayos ago. What did we say in that case? Beis Shammai omrim timkar. Beis Shammai says she's allowed to sell property. Or Beis Hillel omrim lo simkar. Beis Hillel says she can't sell. And elu v'elu modim shemachra v'nas nakayim. And both agreed that if she did sell, the sale is binding. So what do you see from here? That even in cases where Chazal said you shouldn't sell something, if you sold it, what's the halacha? It works. So same thing over here. I got it. Shimon should not be gifting away parts of the estate because a Yavam really shouldn't be transacting anything with the estate of his deceased brother because the entire estate is encumbered to the Ksuva. But at the end of the day, if he did it, Shimon promises a portion of the estate to Levi, it should work. To which the Gemara says, Shachu ala kamed Rabbi Chanina bar papi, shalcha kid Rav Yosef. So I will say, ultimately, again, they sent this shaila. I'm sorry. Shachu ala kamed Rav Chanina bar papi. So they sent this before Rav Chanina bar papi. And what happened? Shalcha kid Rav Yosef. So Rav Chanina bar papi sent back the answer in accordance with Rav Yosef. Do we literally hang our hat on Rav Chanina bar papi? Just because Rav Chanina bar papi said that halacha Rav Yosef, do we automatically ascribe that? Do we automatically assume that's the halacha? Ultimately, again, he sent back like Abaye. Abaye was the one who said that if you sell something that you shouldn't, nevertheless, what? The sale stands. Rav Yosef shalchuli. And if Rav Yosef advances a different reason, send it to me. Nafak Rav Yosef dafa ashkach. So Rav Yosef went out and he found the brisa. You know what? We're going to stop over here for today. Again, I'm leaving you a little bit of a cliffhanger. So just so you understand where I'm leaving you. Again, I'll say again. Apologize for the cliffhanger, but here's where we're leaving off. We're leaving off in a very specific case, right? Where essentially the overarching question is, if you have property that is encumbered that you're not allowed to sell, but you sell it anyway, does the transaction work or not? The specific application of that is, Reuven died, leaves behind an almana. Shimon wants to do yibum, right? So we have a brisa that says Shimon can't sell off any of that property because it's all encumbered to Rachel's ksuva. In our specific case, what we're focusing on over here is what? Is where Levi, the younger brother, wants to give Rachel a get to preclude yibum from occurring because he wants to inherit equally in Reuven's estate. Shimon, in an offer to stave off his brother's plan, says, calm down, I'll cut you in for half, right? I'll inherit it, give you off for half. So what's the shaila? Does that statement work or not? At first glance, it would appear that statement is totally meaningless since the Avam has no ability to transact anything with the estate of his deceased brother since it's all encumbered. But yet we seem to see that even cases where you can't sell something or transact business, you can't do it with a chatrila, but if you did it b'diavad, it works. What's the halacha? To be continued. Emir Hashem and tomorrow, shir on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, ba'aleinu l'tova. I will say, shkoyach, siva chasima tova. All right, Chavra on Zoom. Everyone have a Ksiva v'chasima tova. Beautiful, beautiful year. Ksiva chasima tova. A good convention to everyone.